Hi, and welcome to another episode of Top Volts. And today we're going to be touching on some of the vintage motors used in these cars. These motors that you can see in front of us here, they range from 1960 around to 2005. And the way I've got them laid out here is in date related, you could say, with the transition period between the motors sort of changing over on each other. But roughly speaking, this is the time period that you can see in front of us. So we're going from 1960 to 2005. So if we start with the first motor, which is the RX motor. This motor was very widely used in the early days, so right through the 60s really, and even some of the early 70s cars still had the RX motor in. So this is with the exposed brushes, where you can see it's been held by a spring. So very easy to change the brushes on this motor. I do like these motors. They hinge from this point in the cars, which is brilliant. It means you can work on both sides of the motor. Probably my favourite motor out of all of these, purely for ease, and I quite like the look and the style of it. So that's the RX motor from around the 1960s to early 70s, you could say. And then that moves us on to the sled motor. Another very well put together motor, very compact. You would have the guides attached to this side, which are adjustable for the different lengths of car. It's basically an RX motor, but with a few upgrades. For example, they've brought the spring across the back to hold the two brushes in place, which actually works really well. These brushes have got plenty of spring on there, and also it allows quite easy access to cleaning the connection points on this motor. And once again, a very tidy bit of kit really, with the rear axle all built in. Very tidy, and actually very reliable, and you can get a fair amount of power out of these. So that's the sled engine, used once again 60s into the 70s. And that brings us on to the baby to the sled motor, which is the junior formula motors, which were also used in various other cars as well, like the Mini, the little Austin Mini Cooper, front wheel drive. They use these but in reverse, but you would find these in pretty much all Formula Junior cars. Once again, external brushes on the side, very similar to the RX motor, held in by these springs, going straight onto connection point there. So very tidy little motor. You go from the aluminium to the plastic. I don't think these came in metal or aluminium. I'm pretty sure the end piece was always plastic, but I could be wrong. But once again, a very tidy little motor, obviously much more underpowered than the sled motor, but when you compare the size difference, the power from this is noticeably different. But in the way of compact little electric motors, this is absolutely amazing, and once again, nice and easy to work on. And now this moves us along. So moving along from that, technically that should be the other way around, sorry. So that brings us on to the Raymond motor. So the Raymond motor, a lot of these, they came in sort of similar cars to like this full GT40. So you've got the Raymond motor with the rear sort of axle all built in, once again, to bring it all into one unit. And that was fixed in through these two screws, and then just held the whole rear axle together, and then you were able to click the whole thing into the car. Once again, very simple way of putting all the rear axle together again. It's very similar to these sort of earlier motors, but once again, they came in a range of different powers. You could also get these in a race tuned, the same as the RX motor. The early RX motor could come in a race tuned. The only difference being is the black frame on the race tuned, and also obviously they would have changed the windings and whatnot to increase the RPMs, and the same goes for the Raymond motor. The race tuned versions, they just have different windings, which basically just increase the RPMs of the motor. The brushes are found in the sides, held in by springs. This spring right there. So very easy to change the brushes. A little bit more tricky to clean the terminals, the actual point of contact, but you can get down there. And then this brings us on to the Johnson 111. So this is the Johnson 111. This was very widely used through the 70s and into the early 80s. And I would say even probably pushing towards the 90s, but it was certainly used late 70s into pretty much all of the 80s. But a very, very sturdy, strong motor. These type of motors clicked into the frame of the car itself, so you very rarely found these connected with a rear axle or anything, even though it looks like there's the possibility for it. But from my experience, a lot of these were clicked into the chassis of the car. But once again, incredibly widely used. So this is the Johnson 111, and the brushes are located in the sides. Which once again, you know, you can pull these brushes out quite easily, just held in by a spring. So if you had to change those, not really a problem on these at all. Which is great with these early motors. They were user friendly for maintenance. And then onto the Johnson 222. So very similar, very, very similar to the Raymond. In the dimensions, almost identical. But the difference being is the design of the port opening and the age difference. The Raymond being an older version, you could say. But once again, with the Johnson 222, very widely used. A lot of the came with the rear axle assembly, which I think I've got one here. So you have a rear axle assembly like this, and that would attach just like that, then screwed in through the back. Once again, a very tidy assembly. Made it very sturdy, very reliable. Brushes are in the side, similar to the Raymond, except the Raymond brushes are a little bit wider. But once again, a very sturdy, strong motor, and quite commonly used on the open chassis, sort of just the body shell of the car, with these exposed underneath. But that's the Raymond 222. And once again, kind of used around that sort of late 70s, 80s period. And bring us into like the 90s now. So here we've got, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, the Mabushi motor, which was probably the most used motor in the 90s, and even pushing into like 2005 to about 2005, but certainly throughout the 90s. And they came in a various different models, or colours, should I say. They're also used as a sidewinder motor as well. There is a sidewinder motor you can get, but technically same dimensions. Maybe the sidewinder motor is a little bit more powerful, but you can mess around with these inside and change the windings and increase the RPMs yourself. But they're certainly a very reliable motor. Not so easy to get into. You have to bend these tabs back to gain access to the brushes, which are just inside this section there. But very rarely do you need to even get in there. And these motors are quite readily available, but they do rev very, very well. Very, very well. which, you know, I'm fairly impressed with. There is one motor that I forgot to mention, which is this one here, which is the Mabushi small can motor, which is earlier than the other Mabushi motors there. Once again, a very similar dimension, except this is exposed. Once again, the brushes are in the same location. So placing them in their time scales, we're looking at it like that. So you've got the RX motor, the sled motor, the Junior Formula motor, the Raymond, the Johnson 111, the Mabushi small can motor, the Johnson 222, and the Mabushi motors through the 90s through to the 2000s. Well, I hope this video has been of some interest, and hopefully some information here might just help you when you're working out which motor goes in what age of car. It certainly helped me to do a little bit of research on this to make sure that I was putting the correct motors in the correct time period of car. But hopefully you'll take something from this. Obviously, if there is any other information you've got on these motors, or if you think I've got some of the timescales wrong and stuff like that, please correct me, as any information is great. But like I said, I hope you've just taken something from this and actually found it of use. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you at the next one.